The summer of 1944 should have been a moment of reprieve for Germany. To the west, the Allies had stormed the beaches of Normandy, and Hitler was convinced the main threat was unfolding there. But in the east, beyond dense forests, winding rivers, and the shattered towns of Belarus, another danger was gathering, far larger, far deadlier. German soldiers stationed there called it the cauldron without fire. At night, they swore the air smelled of gunpowder, even when no battles raged. Trains disappeared. Towns emptied. And Soviet patrols seemed to vanish into the trees, only to reappear miles away. The Germans did not know that the Red Army was preparing the greatest offensive of the Second World War, a strike so vast it would erase Hitler's proudest army group almost overnight. This was Operation Bagration, the blow that would crush Army Group Center, tear open the German front like wet paper, and forever change the course of the war. By mid-1944, Hitler believed he understood the Soviet Union. 3 years of brutal fighting had taught him one lesson: the Russians attack where you expect them least. In the south, oil fields; in the north, Leningrad; and in the center, Belarus, swamps, forests, broken villages, a stable front, he called it. What he didn't realize was that this so-called quiet sector was the product of elaborate Soviet deception. It fooled not only German intelligence, but many Soviet commanders as well. German forces in the center, Army Group Center, were overstretched, exhausted, and poorly equipped. Led by Field Marshal Ernst Busch, they were loyal, disciplined, but inflexible and blind to the storm approaching. Minor Soviet troop movements were noted but dismissed. Nothing suggested disaster. And yet, disaster was exactly what awaited them. Operation Bagration was not a simple attack. It was a meticulously planned symphony of force, deception, and precision. Unlike previous Soviet offensives, it combined overwhelming numbers with cunning strategy. Over 2 million Soviet soldiers prepared to advance. Supported by more than 5,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 5,300 aircraft, and an endless supply of artillery. Millions of shells were stockpiled. Hundreds of thousands of trucks would move supplies to sustain the attack. Engineers constructed fake bridges, decoy fortifications, and false radio signals. False troop concentrations were reported far from Belarus, convincing German intelligence that the real attack would come elsewhere. Every detail was carefully orchestrated. This was a war of illusion as much as force. The Germans were about to walk into a trap they couldn't see. By June 19th, German outposts noticed something unusual. Engines rumbled in the distance, shaking the earth like a coming storm. Patrols investigated but found only fog and undergrowth. In reality, thousands of Soviet soldiers were moving at night, camouflaged, guided by local partisans who had spent months sabotaging supply lines and cutting communications. The enemy didn't know that the storm had already arrived. At 4 a.m. on June 22nd, exactly 3 years after Operation Barbarossa, the sky over Belarus erupted. Millions of shells rained down in an artillery barrage so massive German soldiers described it as turning the world into liquid fire. Trenches, depots, and supply hubs were leveled in minutes. Thousands of aircraft joined the assault, dominating the skies. Infantry and armor followed, advancing behind creeping barrages. Army Group Center, once the backbone of the German Eastern Front, began to disintegrate immediately. German radio operators recalled that the front simply vanished. One said, "When I opened my eyes, there was no trench, just smoke." The storm of men, tanks, and shells left destruction in every direction. Bagration was not about frontal assaults. Its genius lay in massive encirclements. The first target was Vitebsk. Hitler declared it a fortress city, no retreat allowed. 30,000 defenders were trapped. Then 48 hours, the city fell. Almost all defenders killed or captured. Similar encirclements followed at Orsha Mogilev and Bobryansk. At Bobryansk, troops tried to escape across the Berezina River, only to find the banks filled with Soviet aircraft, artillery, and troops. Survivors were called. The river turned black with bodies. Entire divisions vanished in a week. By early July, Army Group Center was crumbling. Field Marshal Busch begged Hitler to allow a retreat. Hitler refused. New leadership arrived in the form of Field Marshal Walter Model, famed for crisis management. But even he admitted privately, "I cannot save this army group." Divisions disappeared. Units listed on reports had no surviving officers. Some German soldiers fled so fast that Soviet tank crews found warm meals still on tables. The collapse was total, comprehensive, and swift. Soviet forces pressed west, toward Minsk. They avoided head-on assaults, instead isolating and encircling the city. Tanks and infantry moved so fast, they outpaced their own supply lines. One commander joked that even the birds couldn't keep up. German forces tried to flee, but converging Soviet armies trapped them. On July 3rd, Minsk fell after brutal street fighting. More than 100,000 German troops were captured or killed, for to the Germans, it became a symbol of hopelessness. For the Soviets, it was proof that meticulous planning and relentless momentum could accomplish what seemed impossible. Operation Bagration was a tale of strategy, but also human endurance. A Soviet tank crew advanced 72 hours without rest, falling asleep inside their moving tank once they finally paused. Several German commanders vanished during retreats, killed or captured. A teenage partisan guided a Soviet battalion through swamps, allowing the destruction of a German artillery battery. Villagers risked execution to provide Soviet troops with hidden routes across rivers. These acts of bravery and desperation shaped the offensive just as much as tanks and artillery. After Minsk, the Soviets turned north and west, targeting Vilnius and Kaunas. German defenders were ordered to hold these cities as fortresses. Soviet armies surrounded Vilnius within days. Attempts at breakouts were annihilated. Kaunas fell soon after. By August, the Soviet advance had pushed hundreds of kilometers west, opening the road to East Prussia. Operation Bagration was unprecedented in its devastation. Approximately 450,000 German casualties occurred in less than 2 months. 28 out of 34 divisions were destroyed. Entire cities were liberated, and vast areas of Belarus and Western Russia were freed from occupation. The German army suffered losses far exceeding those at Normandy, a fact often overlooked in Western histories. Hitler's Osterthe, once proud German army, would never recover. Even as reports of disaster arrived, Hitler refused to acknowledge the truth. He insisted the main Soviet thrust was elsewhere. Obsessive declarations of fortress cities turned tactical retreats into catastrophic encirclements. The Eastern Front, once seen as stable, had collapsed under the weight of misjudgment, deception, and overwhelming force. As Field Marshal Model later admitted, Hitler lost the Eastern Front long before the Soviets reached Berlin. Progression was the point of no return. Operation Bagration liberated millions, but exposed terrible suffering. Villages lay in ruins. Mass graves dotted forests. Civilians hid in cellars. Children were orphaned, and survivors of forced labor camps emerged. 4 Red Army soldiers. Victory mingled with grief. Cities were free, but the scars of occupation remained. History remembers the numbers, but the faces, the families, and the personal tragedies were real and countless. Bagration reshaped the war. Germany's Eastern Front was shattered. Poland lay open to Soviet advance. Romania and Hungary fell shortly after. The Allies benefited as German reserves were tied down in the east. The myth of German invincibility was gone. Army Group Center had been the linchpin of the Eastern Front. Its destruction ensured the Soviet Union now held the initiative all the way to Berlin. Despite its scale, Bagration is often overshadowed by D-Day. Yet it stands as one of the largest offensives in history, the fastest collapse of a major army, and a masterpiece of deception and coordination. The Red Army had transformed from a battered, retreating force into a decisive, operationally brilliant machine. German survivors would never forget it. Soviet veterans celebrated it as a crowning achievement. In the summer of 1944, the forests of Belarus shook with thunder. Trenches disappeared under tanks and artillery. Cities burned and were rebuilt. Families mourned and celebrated. The tide of war shifted irrevocably. Operation Bagration did not just destroy an army, it destroyed the illusion of German victory. It paved the way to Berlin, proved the strength of the Red Army, and changed the course of the Second World War forever. The Eastern Front would never be the same again, and neither would the world. And that concludes our journey into this extraordinary moment in history. If you enjoyed exploring the past with me, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next deep dive. Now it's your turn. What historical event should we uncover next? Share your ideas in the comments below, and your suggestion might be featured in a future video. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep seeking the stories that shaped our world.